Warning: this podcast is uncensored and may not be suitable for all audiences. The following content contains cursing, dumb jokes, alcohol, and sometimes somewhat disturbing images. If you like this kind of content, then you're in the right place. Otherwise, you may enjoy some of our other videos instead. Enjoy!
Welcome to this week's episode of The Night Shift. I'm Jimmy. I'll be your host. This week we're going to be talking about some Native American cryptids and folklore, just to go along with the season. And with that, I think Jared has some announcements he'd like to make before we get rolling.
So first and foremost, he looks like and sounds like shit for a few reasons. One, he looks like shit because he was born that way. But the video quality looks like shit because his computer exploded. As soon as we sat down to record, he got a blue screen, and every time he reboots, it just crashes. It freezes and crashes, which is awesome. But this is the way we decided to do this, because we're recording this today. It has to be today. This will come out later, but currently it's Monday? Thanksgiving is
Monday.
on Thursday, and I'm trying to get it out on Thanksgiving. I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
With that being said, there's a few announcements for how we want to start doing this. We're going to do this one for November. We're going to try and do at least one in December. I would like to do two, but with the holiday, I don't really see it happening. And then starting January, we're going to try to do one a week up to, at least 3 a month. I think 3 a month is probably a comfortable amount because I'm trying to get back consistent with the investigations, and that'll help it mesh a little bit better, give me time to edit everything. But yeah. So we're also going to do it in the way of, now it's just me and Jimmy. And each one of us is going to be a host every week. We might have some guests on, might have some other things come up. Interesting thing is, there's a missing person. As much as I don't want to address it, has to be addressed. I think the best way to word it is, there was a little bit of a falling out, which is why the background looks like this now instead of how it did. And there's one less person. We'll call him Voldemort because he is who shall not be named. And I refuse to talk about what happened. But long story short, it's me and Jimmy now. It's gonna stay that way. The OG crew. And we're going to try and be more consistent with it. We'll talk about some Native American legends, and Jimmy is in charge. Take it away.
First of all, I want to address also, I apologize for looking like Shrek, but it's the best way that I can hear and that he can hear me.
I don't know what he's talking about. He looks that way all the time.
Fuck off. And then second off, I am going to be reading. I prepared some notes for everybody. So I think it'll be good for Jared. He also got a little homework. So going forward, a lot like Jared was saying, one of us is going to be the host for the week, and they're going to give a little bit of homework to the other person just to kind of keep the conversation going. So the first one we're going to talk about is from the Algonquin people and their mythology, and that is the one that everybody knows about, the Wendigo. So keep in mind, I am not good with other languages. I will attempt to say these words the best I can.
Yeah, the pronunciations are going to suck. We tried, but I don't know any Native American languages.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with some words here and there. All right, so the Wendigo, also known as Achin, Ichun, Kiwok, and I'm going to skip the rest because I already know I'm butchering them. But the Wendigo is a mythological, cannibalistic monster in the spiritual tradition of North American Algonquin-speaking tribes. It's associated with winter and described as either a fearsome beast that stalks and eats humans, or as a spirit that possesses humans, causing them to turn into cannibals. There are many different spellings and pronunciations for Wendigo. I gave you about 3 that were very poorly pronounced, but there are more. In Ojibwe, the term is defined as a winter cannibal monster, but its name may derive from the Algonquin word we. Oh God. Basically, it means owl. Let's just go with that. So, some descriptions in folklore. Some legends say that the Wendigo is an emaciated figure with ashen flesh. Others describe it as a gigantic creature up to 15 feet or 4.5 meters tall, or as a beast that grows larger the more that it eats. It may have sunken or glowing eyes and sharp yellowed fangs and claws. Its lips are almost always chewed or entirely missing because it's eaten them.
Really?
It may be
That's
hairless.
disgusting.
Yeah. So you got to remember it's a cannibalistic creature, so it will literally eat anything and everything that it can come across.
So it could potentially eat
And
itself if it was hungry enough.
potentially, I mean, the only thing that I've really seen about it is its lips. Because, I mean, if you think about it, it's like, think of it as a wild animal, right? It's not going to chew off a limb or anything if it doesn't have to because it needs those to hunt its prey. Um,
So
but
throughout this video, I'm gonna be kind of throwing up pictures of roughly what they look like from the best
yeah,
estimation I can find. But if you ever played the game Until Dawn, they're like the main enemy, and I've always seen them looking kind of like Smeagol type creatures.
yeah, so that's actually I was going to bring in the next one. So in some interpretations, it could be hairless, like in Until Dawn, or it'll have fur and it may have pointed ears and horns or antlers like a deer. Which, if you Google, pictures of a Wendigo or something like that, you'll see a big mix between the two. Um, I've always assumed that they were more kind of like what you were saying, like a Descent slash Smeagol Gollum kind of looking thing. But there are the interpretations of the hairy antlered variety as well. So one of the things that's going to be key there is it'll always basically, like, if you're in the presence of a Wendigo, it smells of rotting flesh and is usually first detected by humans by its horrible odor. Wendigo are believed to have exceptionally sharp eyesight, hearing, and sense of smell, as well as superior strength and speed in order to stalk and overpower their victims. So, for anyone that has played Until Dawn, this is very evident in the game. But it makes sense too because, like, think about it. This is like the perfect predator, if you will. Like, it's going to need to have sharp eyes and hearing and smell and everything like that to locate its prey, and then the speed and strength is going to be what inevitably brings it down. And later on, I'm going to be talking about two separate stories or cases of Wendigo or Wendigo psychosis, because that is an actual medical term, Wendigo psychosis. I was trying to find there was an incident in, I want to say it was either in Canada or northern US. I can't remember specifically, but it was like, I'm going to just throw out a year. I'm going to say 20 years ago or so, where a man was on a bus and ended up decapitating someone and actually eating some of the flesh. There is, like, you can find it, at least you used to be able to find it. I quick looked at this, but I wanted to keep it more on the folk side. So if anyone wants to hear more about that case in the future, feel free to drop that in the comments, and that's something that we can talk about in the future as well. But getting back to it, so they're going to live in colder climates, in woodlands and lakes of Canada and the northern U.S. They can move easily through deep snow and across ice. A shaman, so I don't want to call him a witch doctor, but a shaman, someone that's very spiritual in a tribe, may be the only person who can subdue and destroy a Wendigo. And in order to destroy a Wendigo, they have to use either silver, steel, or iron bullets or daggers. And in some legends, it claims that the only way to kill a Wendigo is to cut out its heart and either burn it or melt it in a fire. And that's the only way to truly destroy the spirit of the Wendigo. And again, goes back to until dawn. Um,
It's such an awesome
so the
game.
it really is, and it's kind of like we're ruining the game in a way, because for anyone that has played the game, you know, like, oh, it's just like some killer or slasher, and it ends up not being that. But if you haven't played it, don't let this ruin the game. It's amazing. Highly recommend.
Absolutely, absolutely love that game.
Um, so the Wendigo is sometimes described as a spirit rather than a physical presence. And again, this kind of goes into the Wendigo psychosis as well. Like, and you'll kind of see where that comes
So I,
into.
I have a question, just because I don't know where you're gonna
Yeah.
go with it. From I briefly looked up Wendigo because just to kind of allude to what we're gonna talk to later, Skinwalkers are gonna come up. I was
Yep.
curious about the difference between them because they're often described similarly. I saw sometimes they're seen as a shaman that has the ability to shapeshift into a Wendigo.
So I have not heard that one. Um, Basically, what I've heard is that it is. Uh, it'll kind of get alluded to later, but I'll be speaking of this part with the spirit. So I'll bring that up as we go. But usually it's, they're being possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo, or in some cases it's someone who has consumed human flesh, and
I have
over
seen
time,
that you consume human flesh and it like poisons your body and mind and you become this
yeah.
being.
So the way I view it is it's a spirit either way, um, but you can become possessed by it through, like a classical kind of like demonic possession type thing, or you ingest human flesh and then you're basically inviting the spirit in, if that makes
Yeah, to
sense.
me it's kind of like mad cow disease
Yeah.
where you
Yeah, that's a good
consume
one.
like
That was
human
good.
flesh and it takes over your mind and body
Yeah,
and you morph into this thing.
that's actually really good. I actually never really thought of
It's
that
basically
comparison.
like a four-legged zombie.
Yeah, more animalistic zombie, I would say. But yeah, so the spirit, in Cree mythology, the Wendigo is believed to be an evil spirit that possesses humans, and the spirit enters a person by biting him or her, or through a dream. So you could also maybe, you know, for anyone that's aware, dream catchers, they were basically created to basically stop like these evil spirits, or to, capture these um, like nightmares and things like that. So you could think of it as, the dream catcher is going to potentially stop a Wendigo from possessing you. I'd
That
have to look
actually
more.
that brings up a little bit of a point because I didn't think to include the Dreamcatcher thing, but
No, me
I
neither.
have a short list of like Native American magics. One of which I just
Okay.
want to bring up is dream interpretation, because dreams, a lot of times, I'm not gonna say every Native American culture, but in a lot of the big ones, dreams are a significant part. And dream interpretation is actually considered a magical ability, but it's also the practice of analyzing dreams and messages from the spirit world. Spirits and other beings can communicate with us and like influence our minds, and a lot of times all dreams are set, especially the ones that are memorable,
Yeah.
are said to actually be messages from either our ancestors or from spiritual beings trying to communicate or warn us or inform us. I just thought it was interesting that you brought up dream catchers, because it
Yeah.
makes me wonder if like maybe nightmares, they could be warnings for us, but I wonder if there's like a malicious or malevolent beings trying to influence our minds, and maybe that's kind of where dream catchers come in to help prevent that.
So Lejeune described a woman who warns of an action that had eaten some tribal members nearby, and that would eat a great many more of them if it were not called somewhere else. So a few instances of murder and cannibalism in North America were blamed on the Wendigo. These included a case in Alberta, Canada in 1879. So this is going to be a story I'm going to go on in a little more detail in a little bit. Both the ones I'm going to bring up. um, where a Cree hunter and trapper named Swift Runner claimed a Wendigo spirit had entered his dreams and told him to eat his family. He was
Wow.
tried for murder, found guilty, and he was hung for his crimes later that year. Another case occurred in 1907 among the Sandy Lake First Nation community in northern Ontario. The tribal shaman, Jack Fiddler, and his brother, Joseph Fiddler, were charged with the murder of Joseph's daughter-in-law, whom they had strangled to prevent her from becoming possessed by a Wendigo. After the brothers' arrest, Jack Fiddler escaped the police and strangled himself, and Joseph Fiddler died from tuberculosis in prison in 1909.
Jesus. Imagine dying because you strangled yourself. Like, you have to have you have to either be completely psychotic or have the strongest
Well,
convictions possible.
so when it says strangled, I'm assuming he hung himself.
It's very
If I was to
possible,
guess,
but
because like you
you
said, I
would
mean,
you
it's
would
kind of
think
like
they would specifically word it. He died via hanging or hanging himself.
right, but kind of like what you were saying, him strangling himself. It's kind of like the whole you can't drown yourself, without like forcibly like drowning yourself.
Yeah, I
Like if you
guess
just
you
hold your
physically.
head
Yeah, I don't
underwater,
think you physically can drown yourself and look.
no, because your survival instincts will kick in and you will try to, prevent yourself from drowning. Now, if you know, attempt to drown yourself and maybe you get trapped or something like that, like, yeah, you'll die. But in the end, your survival instincts as a human, as an animal, are going to kick in. So, by the early 20th century, the term Wendigo psychosis was being used by psychologists and missionaries to describe a culture bound syndrome among Native and First Nations people whose symptoms included delusions of becoming possessed by an evil spirit, depression, violence, a compulsion for eating human flesh, and in some cases, I don't know why I wrote this twice, but basically, cannibalism.
Emphasis on
The syndrome,
cannibalism.
yeah, the syndrome was also diagnosed retroactively in
Ooh,
historical
question.
cases. Yes,
Was Jeffrey Dahmer a Wendigo?
I mean, I guess like the possibility is there. He
Let's
could
do
have
it.
had Wendigo psychosis because the next part I was saying was the syndrome was diagnosed retroactively in historical cases of cannibalism in North America. However, the existence of the syndrome is disputed by some scientists. So, I mean, I guess like you could look at Jeffrey Dahmer and say like, hey, he could have had Wendigo psychosis. He could have been possessed by a Wendigo.
I
Um,
don't want to go on record and say this because I don't know if this is true, but I've read before that
mhm,
um I don't know what they call it, but I think there's a condition of the human mind where if you consume enough human flesh, you will go crazy. Like there's a chemical that gets released in your brain that causes like
yeah, I don't
hallucinations and
know.
psychosis.
I it, it's entirely possible. I mean,
So
think
I think I
about
was
people
reading
that
it
drink salt water.
because there was a law passed about cannibalism. I don't remember the specific one, but there was a guy who he was a scientist and he was trying to study the effects on the human body by consuming human flesh. And he had performed a surgery. I think he removed part of his leg and he was going to cook it and eat it. He removed it. He could not get authorization or in some way he was like caught before he was allowed to eat it and he was ruled that he was not allowed to consume it because it'd be cannibalism and be illegal. But I think that's where I read about it that it can cause psychosis in the mind. But yeah, he removed like a part of his leg. He was gonna cook it and eat it as a full meal, and I think he had. I don't know if he had actually gone through the process and the surgery of removing it, but
Yeah,
I want to say he did.
that's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, but honestly, think about the balls it takes to remove part of your own body so you can eat it.
Yeah, good for that motherfucker. He's probably on
Well,
crack.
he wanted to do the study, but he didn't want to harm another person. So he was like, fuck it.
Do you know what year potentially, or like around the time?
Keep
Because I
talking. I'll
mean,
look it up. I'll
well,
interrupt
I was
you.
gonna say because cocaine used to be in coke, so I mean,
I don't know if that's
maybe
factual.
I like to think so. I like to think we were civilization once. For centuries, indigenous artists and activists have drawn on the Wendigo legend both literally and metaphorically to describe such issues as colonialism, violence, and environmental destruction. American writer Louise Erdrich, he wrote a poem in 1984 entitled Wendigo, and it tells of a man trapped inside a Wendigo who abducts a young girl who in turn releases his spirit. Her novel, The Roundhouse, wow, she's been a while, in 2012, which is centered around an Ojibwe boy in North Dakota seeking justice after his mother has been essayed. Let's just say that because I don't know. I don't want to say stuff that's going to get this video flagged. Uses the Wendigo legend to explore views of retribution and justice among the boy's tribe versus those of the U.S. government. In the 21st century, activist Winona LaDuke coined the term Wendigo economics to criticize corporations' cannibalistic effect on the earth. So you can see that even the term Wendigo is being used in pop culture, and I mean, from that last one, even in like a government type setting. So the next part, we're going to talk about the Wendigo in pop culture. Continue that. So in the 19th century, so that's the 1800s for anyone unsure, the Wendigo legend has also captured the imagination of non-indigenous authors. In The Wilderness Hunter, 1893, the future U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt includes a goblin story about a bear-like beast that stalks the camp of two hunters, leaving only one to survive and tell the tale. Readers have interpreted Roosevelt's beast as either being the legendary Bigfoot, which is in Native American folklore as well. I chose not to bring that one up because everybody knows about Bigfoot, or a Wendigo. British writer Algernon,
What a
even the
name.
British, even the British are fucked up. Nothing against the British. You're all right.
Fuck the British. I'm just kidding. It's a
Blackwood's
joke.
novella The Wendigo in 1910 tells a similar story of a mysterious monster hunting a campsite in the Canadian wilderness, and American novelist Stephen King features a Wendigo in the story Pet Sematary. Canadian writer Margaret Atwood examines the Wendigo legend in Strange Things, the malevolent North in Canadian literature, a book of lectures of the imaginative landscape of Canadian literature. Wendigos have also found their way into the plots of Jesus Christ, television shows such as Hannibal, video games such as Until Dawn, and comic books including The Incredible Hulk and Wolverine. A Wendigo character also appears in the action film The Lone Ranger 2020 or 2013. Despite the plot's southwestern U.S. setting, in director Scott Cooper and producer God damn it, Guillermo, can't say it,
Guillermo?
Guillermo. I was stumbling. I'm sorry. Yeah, fuck, Guillermo.
Guillermo.
Yeah, Del Toro's Antlers in 2021, which I started and I did not finish it.
Guillermo del Toro?
Yeah, that guy. I'm sorry. The Wendigo is a deer-like creature in a story that combines supernatural horror and generational trauma in a small-town setting. So I know. Did you want to talk more about the magic now before I get into the stories of Swift Runner and Jack Fiddler?
Yeah, I think this is a good point to transition. Because it's just gonna take a second. I did so real quick while you were talking, I did some research trying to find the story I was talking about, and I cannot find it. But what I did find is something disgustingly interesting about cannibalism. Um, this was during plague times. Oh, I'm gonna be sick talking about this. This is gross. Listen to this. It was an attempt to ward off the plague. People would consume menstrual blood from a young virgin maiden combined with other ingredients to make a cake um, that people wore on a string
Ugh.
around their neck. Um, and it wasn't effective because as many as 50% of Europeans died. But they would make a cake out of menstrual blood from a virgin and other ingredients and wear it around their neck. Um, but yeah, there were all kinds of different um recipes people would make that include powders and oils that would come from excavated mummies. Apothecaries would use a black substance that would grow on the outside of mummies, and because of that, I guess the black market, and I think it was the 1800s, it flooded with like this powder that was supposed to have come from excavated mummies. People would consume and use as an ingredient in different things.
All right, yeah, move on to something else. I'm getting like chills. That's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, it's horrible. Skimming through that, I kind of got nauseous, but I just saw the menstrual blood of like virgins, and I was like, "This is
Yeah, you're
horrible."
like, oh, I just got to bring that one up.
Anyway, in a lot of Native American cultures, there's different forms of magics or abilities. And I'm not going to talk about all of them because there's hundreds of Native American cultures that probably believe differently. But I'm going to talk about a few of the common ones, and we'll just go through it quickly. The first one I listed is skinwalking because everyone knows about skinwalkers, um, and they're supposedly people that could shapeshift. But skinwalking is typically of Navajo descent. I've seen it in a few
Mhm.
different forms. Um, the Cree people, they talk a lot about Wendigo, but skinwalkers also often confused with Wendigo. But skinwalking is typically Navajo practice where individuals can transform into animals, typically with malicious intent. It was considered almost like a dark magic or dark ability that people had. As humans, they had animal eyes. As animals, they would have like bright red eyes when a light shined on them.
Yeah,
But they were also considered evil witches.
yeah,
not gonna go too into it because I think you are going to talk about skinwalkers.
yeah. Yeah. Once we get through the stories, that's the next part.
Okay.
But we can definitely elaborate more on skinwalkers with what you have and what I have.
Okay. Um, there's also plant medicine. Um, it's kind of spiritually involved, but also botanically involved. It's just the practice of using plants with spiritual qualities for healing or other abilities. There's vision quests, which are typically a solitary ritual where individuals seek spiritual guidance and knowledge through fasting and exposure to the elements, like doing rituals solitarily out in nature, fasting yourself, and it brings you closer to the spirituality of the earth, I guess, and you can have
Yeah,
visions, like meditating in a way in other
yeah,
cultures. There's spirit communication, which is doing certain rituals that allow you to connect with spirits of your ancestors, sometimes even just spirits of nature, to gain knowledge or so on and so forth. There's weather magic, which are rituals aimed at influencing weather patterns such as rain, wind, and thunderstorms specifically. There's also other rituals that would be performed to appease spirits that were causing rather harsh weather patterns. And then again, dream interpretation, which is the practice of analyzing dreams and messages from the spiritual world, which could be spirits of your ancestors or other entities that are trying to communicate with you through your mind, which leads into other Native American cryptids, such as skinwalkers, who are said to be able to control your mind in certain aspects, or other beings that could influence your mind, or things like that. But those are just some of the common ones. There's plenty of more magical and spiritual abilities of Native American people, but those are just some of the common ones that I was able to find.
Okay. Yeah, and I think like I said, especially when we start getting into Skinwalker and some of those other ones, definitely interject whatever you were able to find, and any knowledge you have.
Okay.
It'll just make better conversation. So for our next one, we're going to talk about skinwalkers, as we've been discussing already. But so the skinwalker legend um, comes from the Apache, Hopi, or Hopi, not sure, Pueblo, and Navajo peoples. It's actually a cryptid that can be found in a number of cultures around the world, but for now, we're going to just focus on the Native American aspect.
Also for reference,
So,
I've seen it in Canadian European culture as well. That's what he means by
yeah.
all over the world. These are in a lot of cultures accepted to be fact. It's not just a legend, it's like a thing people are actually scared of around the world.
And there's a lot of different cryptids that are like that. You'll see as we continue on. So while the origin of this creature varies greatly between the different tribes, almost all of them describe the creature as an abnormally large humanoid with bright orange eyes, and are also said to be extremely agile, tough, and nearly impossible to kill. Mostly associated with the Navajo, but known by many tribes in the Southwest, a skinwalker is an evil witch, most often male, wizard, who dons the skin of an animal in order to transform into that animal. In order to gain the magic, or in order to gain the infernal magic needed to do things such as shapeshifting, the initiate has to commit a serious crime, such as murder and cannibalization of a family member. So there's a little um, tie into the whole Wendigo, like you were kind of talking
Yeah, and
about.
I wanted to kind of spitball off that because I looked a little bit specifically into Skinwalker Ranch, which we'll talk about. There's some parallels, but I do want to say it's when he says orange eyes, it's also seen as bright red eyes, such as like when a light is shining in their eyes, it reflects like a really bright red. And it could be as simple as just murdering a family member. As it's worded in some ways, it doesn't necessarily have to be cannibalism, but it's
Yeah.
committing atrocity towards a family member is one significant way that someone could become like gain the abilities of a skinwalker. And also keep in mind, this is kind of considered a dark magic from what I understand. Like it's a
Yeah.
big no-no in a lot of cultures. And if you are a skinwalker, then you typically have a malicious intent. It's almost
Hmm.
always associated with malicious intent. Like this is not something you should be able to do.
Right. Skinwalkers are considered to be so evil that to this day, most Native Americans in the Southwest refuse to talk about them for fear that speaking of them too much will bring their attention, kind of like saying Beetlejuice.
Fair.
To
Or
this
Bloody
day,
Mary.
Bloody Mary. To this day, there are reports of skinwalkers harassing and attacking people. Whether or not they have real magical powers, these people are extraordinarily sadistic. So I wouldn't recommend looking for them. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker, there is a way to say it in Navajo, and I can't do it, is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Um, Skinwalker. So I'm going to really try and say it here because I have what it roughly
I'll
translates
throw it up
to.
on the screen.
The Yi Naldashui, translating to by means of it, it goes on all fours, is one of several types of skinwalkers within the Navajo beliefs. These witches are seen as the antithesis of Navajo values, performing malevolent ceremonies and using manipulative magic in stark contrast to the beneficial works of medicine people.
And yeah, that's kind of what I meant by like it's typically a no-no. This is a bad thing to
Yeah.
do. I also want to say you said into an animal. From what I've seen, it's very vague on the specific animals. Um,
Yeah, I think I have it.
the
I think
accounts I've seen are typically like wolves. That's like the most
Yeah, I've
common.
seen wolves,
Once
coyotes.
we get into Skinwalker Ranch, it talks about cows as well. But
I've seen
it's
that too,
said across cultures, the general consensus is they could turn into any kind of animal.
as long as they wear the skin of said
I've
animal.
also seen where they would specifically turn into pet animals. They would kill like a family dog or a pet for
Yeah.
whatever reason to gain entry so they could cause harm to possessions, people, or cause illness to a certain family that they disdained.
So I'm not 100% sure if I have it in my notes, but from what I've seen or heard and everything about them is when they do take on the guise of a animal, it's not natural. They don't move exactly like how that animal would. They look off
Yeah, like
and like Jim
Uncanny
was saying,
Valley. And I will throw
yeah,
in here a couple pictures of Uncanny Valley to give an idea of what that means if you're not familiar. If you look up anything Uncanny Valley and go to Google Images, you will find some really off putting images of like people or things, like animals that just are not the way they should be. Such as they're people. What I've seen skinwalkers specifically, when they're in their humanoid form, their eyes might be off in the sense they might look kind of animalistic, and as an animal, they might look kind of humanoid. So if you see like a dog that has like humanoid kind of eyes and it just looks off, even though
yeah,
um, brass taxes, it's an animal and it should be fine. It just looks wrong.
yeah. So the legend of the Skinwalker, as I've said before, is really embedded in Navajo tradition, and it's rarely discussed with outsiders. And this is partly due to the cultural taboos and the lack of contextual understanding by non Navajo. So stories often depict skinwalkers using their powers for evil, as we've said, and they're considered a source of fear and mystery within the Navajo communities. Traditional accounts describe them as powerful sorcerers engaging in nefarious acts and gain the ability to transform into animals. The Navajo language, got that part out. I just repeated myself. That's my bad. Navajo witches, including skinwalkers, represent. Oh man, did it again. Oh, I guess I like double copied.
Here, back up and try and say it as like one cohesive thought.
Yeah, let me. Okay. Um, so as I was saying, the legend of the Skinwalker is not well understood outside of Navajo culture, um, and as well in the Cherokee Nation. Academic Adrian Keene says that there is a lack of the necessary cultural context that the stories are embedded within. Traditional Navajo people are reluctant to reveal Skinwalker lore to non Navajo or to discuss it at all among those they do not trust. Keene, founder of the website Native Appropriations, has written in response to non Navajos incorporating the legends into their writing, specifically towards J.K. Rowling. Um, that when this is done, we as a Native people are now open up to the barrage of questions about these beliefs and traditions. So they're very reluctant, again, to give this information out to non Navajo or non Native tribe members because, again, going back, they don't want to talk about these evil spirits for fear that they're going to essentially summon them. Um, but animals associated with witchcraft usually include tricksters, such as coyote. However, it may include other creatures, usually those associated with death or bad omens, and they might also possess living animals or people and walk around in their bodies. The skinwalker can be male or female, but as we've
Oh,
said, it's
that's interesting.
predominantly male.
I want to pause you there just because you said
Mhm.
walk around in their bodies. Like this creature can possess these people and use their bodies
That's
because I haven't
that's what I
seen that.
found.
So that's interesting.
So I have this. This was actually the first time I saw this. Normally, I've only seen it talk about
Like a shape-shifting
um,
human.
animals. So that's something else that I wrote it down to bring up, but it's something I also want to kind of dive into more, um, through research and things like that to better understand this.
It's very interesting that supposedly it's like a person that has gained this spiritual or magical ability to possess like another living being, like an animal, and that being
Yeah,
a skinwalker. That's interesting. I haven't heard that. I just I,
yeah. Like I said, this is the first time I did, but I felt it was worth noting. So that way we could always come back and maybe look into it more.
absolutely.
Maybe that could lead to another, discussion in the future. Um, Skinwalker stories are told among Navajo children. Um, Skinwalker stories told among Navajo children may be complete life and death struggles that end in either Skinwalker or the Navajo killing each other, or partial encounter stories that end in a stalemate. Encounter stories may be composed as Navajo victory stories, with the Skinwalker approaching and being scared away. Non-Navajo interpretations of Skinwalker stories typically take the form of partial encounter stories on the road, where the protagonist is temporarily vulnerable, but then escapes from the Skinwalker in a way not traditionally seen in Navajo stories. Sometimes Navajo children take European folk stories and substitute Skinwalkers for generic killers like the Hook. And that was something else I just wanted to. I said the Hook. I didn't really look into that story to be specific, but just the fact that over time with the introduction of European folk stories and things like that coming and being told throughout the country as a whole, or the U.S. and Canada. I mean, it makes sense that you know there's going to be crossover between stories.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I mean that's just how we are as a species, you know. So, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up about the Skinwalker? That was my brief discussion on them.
If you want to, I can kind of go a little bit into Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, go for it,
Um,
and then we'll go into my favorite one.
so these are just kind of general notes because I want to do a whole episode on Skinwalkers. Um, we can kind of touch on what you talked about and talk more about Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
So, Skinwalker Ranch is given the name for a few reasons. It's kind of conflicting reasons, honestly, because Skinwalker Ranch is just as much Skinwalker Ranch as it is UFO Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
it's from what I can read, I can't find a definitive answer. I think it's either on or very close to prior owned Navajo land, but it's also known as
Makes sense.
Sherman Ranch, which is south. It's southeast of Ballard, Utah, um, which is I think is northern Utah, but basically it's a place where over 100 incidents of vanishing or mutilated cattle, UFOs, orbs, or large animals with piercing red eyes that were unscathed when shot by bullets were seen. And it's not just a place where these stories happen. The areas around there, like the surrounding towns and the people near this area, they wholeheartedly believe this is fact. It's not just stories, it's like things that thousands of people have either seen or have said to have seen agree on. Um, there's also been reports of invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields causing damage to electronics have been found.
So, really quick to interject, I have also seen that one belief is that this area, Skinwalker Ranch, that there's, I guess, a discussion that they, portals to other planes of existence can occur
I
there,
have seen
and that.
some about that. Um, I didn't dig too far deep into that specifically, just because I feel like we could have a whole
Yeah.
conversation just on Skinwalker Ranch. But I will say I have seen this is not just a place of skinwalkers, UFOs. It's a very heavily populated, like documented story wise, of like UFO type things happening. But yeah, it's such a paranormal anomaly of a location.
Hotspot.
Everything on the spectrum of paranormal seemingly has happened here, and we'll kind
Yeah.
of dig into it. So the Sherman family basically bought this piece of land, and they noticed a lot of weird things happening. Um, uh, so they bought it, I believe, in 1994. There was a man named Terry Sherman. Um, One particular story is he saw this huge wolf in his yard, and it wasn't just a huge wolf. It was the biggest wolf ever recorded, plus some, like a very, very, very large wolf. He saw it in his yard and he was concerned. He grabbed his gun and he shot multiple bullets into it, multiple. And it seemed to do no damage. It didn't wince in pain. It didn't react to it at all. And he just kept shooting at it and yelling at it, and eventually it ran off. And he was so confused by it, he wanted to kind of track it, see if he had like injured it, see if he had killed it. He was going to recover the body and kind of look into it. And he followed the tracks for a while, and the tracks just vanished. They kept going and kept going, and all of a sudden they disappeared into thin air. Um, that was one particular account of the Sherman family, but there are tons more, and that's where the origins of Skinwalker Ranch kind of come from. Um, After only 2 years of owning the property, they sold it. They bought it in 1994, sold it in 1996, and they sold it to a guy named Robert Bigelow. What's interesting about him is he founded the National Institute of um, Institute for Discovery Science, which was specifically a foundation he created for research into UFOs and the paranormal. Um, a couple fun facts. It's they bought it for X amount of money at the time, not a whole lot of money. I don't have the exact dollar figure they bought it for, but it's noted as an exponential amount compared to what they bought it for, and they seem to have milked him for as much as possible. But he bought it for $200,000. Um, Yeah, so he founded this institute specifically because he wanted to look into UFOs and the paranormal, but he wanted to do it with the typical scientific approach. And a lot of what they saw was a lot of the same things. They saw mutilated cattle. Um, there were reports of cows with bright red eyes, things like that. Hearing voices, and eventually, after a few years, they sold it, and then they sold it to an unnamed party. They wanted to rename they wanted to remain anonymous for a long time. And then in I think it was 2020, a man named Brandon Fugel kind of announced to the world, "Hey, I've had this for the last few years. I've owned this." I think he bought it in 2016, but they ended up doing a show on the History Channel, which was The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of it was supposed to be with the same principles of trying to do it with a scientific approach, but it was a reality show kind of talking about it. But they saw a lot of weird things like malfunctioning electronics, unexplained illnesses with people in the surrounding area. And one particular thing that really caught my attention is a cow um, that was completely mutilated, but just an hour before, um, the rancher saw this cow alive and healthy. And this was in broad daylight. So he saw his animal, it was completely healthy. An hour later, it was mutilated and dead on his property. in the middle of the day. So I thought that was interesting. Other reports say there was, I think, 2 instances of cows that were seemingly struck by lightning. Like they had scorched skin, but there was no scorched earth. There's also been supposed UFO sightings, different glowing orbs in the distance. The guy, what was his name? Brandon Fugel, the most recent owner I'm talking about, they saw crop circles, things like that. And there was also reports of cars that were left somewhere and parked, and then they would be moved to a completely different location with no tire marks, which I thought was interesting. But there was plenty, and the 2 most often seen crazy things were always UFO sightings, and mutilated cattle, but specifically cattle with bright red glowing eyes when you shine a flashlight at them. So that's about all we have for Skinwalker for this episode. I understand there's so much more lore to talk about. I love Skinwalkers, or the story of them. It's awesome. But those are just some brief stories we can talk about. And if you want to hear more about them or want to know more about Wendigo as well, let us know in the comment section. Additionally, if there's anything specifically you want us to talk about, let us know. We'll talk about it. But from here, we're going to kind of transition into a brief discussion about some other Native American cryptids, specifically Chindi and Amhaluk, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes, I mean that's how I'm pronouncing it. Again, we apologize to anybody
Absolutely
listening.
not trying to offend anyone.
Take offense. Yeah, we're doing the best we can.
Well, we discussed the offension part, and offensiveness. I don't think offension's a word. We talked about it in part 2 of the podcast, which you will never see. So this is the new part 2. As again to the whole topic I was talking about beforehand. But yeah, we're gonna briefly cover it and then we're gonna wrap up from there. So why don't you take us away with whichever one you would start with first?
So we're going to talk about the Chindi, and a big reason I think I wanted to bring this one up, and I talked to Jared about it, is it kind of goes more into the realm that we've discussed in the past, more of a spirit than a cryptid.
So before you dig into it, the reason I think this one's important for people to pay attention to is, from what I understand, is this is mostly Navajo. I don't know if it goes into other cultures, but it's a Native American belief, kind of like, of what it seems like what all negative entities are in the world of the paranormal, which is very interesting because that rolls into kind of our belief, especially when it comes to investigating about the malevolent with the malicious or demonic intent. This is kind of their version of that, which is why I think it's very important to pay attention to. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. In Navajo religious belief, a chindi is left behind after a person dies. It's believed to leave the body with the deceased's last breath. It is everything that was negative about the person's life: pain, fear, anger, disappointment, dissatisfaction.
Dissatisfaction?
Yeah, I know, right? Dissatisfaction. There we go. English. I used to be a teacher.
I was gonna say it. I felt like I had a stroke after listening to you try and say it.
Well, you know what? At least it's not Guillermo del Toro. Resentment and rejection as the residue that man has been unable to bring into universal harmony. Traditional Navajo believe that contact with the Chindi can cause illness and death.
So basically what they say is Chindi is basically the embodiment of what's left over after you die, but it's all the bad parts of a spirit.
All the negative.
All the sadness, the hate, the anger, all those things, and it can cause illness and even death.
Chindi are believed to linger around the deceased's bones or possessions, though possessions are often destroyed after death and contact with bodies is avoided. This kind of goes also into like haunted objects and things like that from our standpoint. The more personal the possession, the stronger the chindi. After death, the deceased's name is never spoken, for fear that the chindi will hear and come and make one ill. Traditional Navajo practice is to allow death to occur outdoors, to allow the chindi to disperse. If a person dies in a house, that building is believed to be inhabited by the chindi and is abandoned. So in Navajo mythology, the chindi is the ghost. Well, we kind of talked about that, but I think it's nice to put a label to it. It's the ghost of the deceased person that's supposed to leave the body with the person's last breath. So, according to tradition, this is because the person was unable to, again, bring themselves harmony. So, like, for someone who is raised Catholic, you're supposed to give your last rites before you die, where you express all of the sins that maybe you hadn't had a chance to atone for or anything like that. And it's like a last ditch effort to, seek that forgiveness. So to me, that's a correlation that I'm seeing with this. The belief that contact with the chindi can induce ghost sickness is also indicated by the tribe's traditional practices. And according to the beliefs of the Navajo, chindi are known to remain around the deceased's possessions, as we said. Um,
So that kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about the chindi. Um, First thing I want to lay out is there's a typical type of house called a hogan. A hogan was typically built out of like logs or sometimes, in rare cases, stone frameworks. And the hogan was just kind of the house that they lived in at these particular times. But I'll get into that in a second. So a lot of times it's believed that if someone passed away inside of a house or inside of a hogan, then that specific place was condemned. It could not be lived in. Um, and oftentimes in Navajo belief, they would allow people to die outside or even carry them outside so they could pass away, so that way the chindi could kind of expel itself into the world. Um, so a lot of times that's where like the ceremony would happen. They would leave them to die outside, and then they would come back for like their version of the funeral. Um, they would typically avoid the dead and absolutely avoid enclosed spaces where someone had died. Because again, you expel your last breath, you're indoors, it's trapped. So if someone were to die in a hogan, it would be completely abandoned. No one could live in it from then on. They would build a whole new one. That's why it was made out of stone sometimes, but typically out of logs, because they could build them quickly and they could just move into them. If someone were to pass away in one of these hogans, the specific way they would try to expel this spirit is you would build a big hole in the north wall. I'm not sure why north, but specifically they would make a hole in the north wall, and that would be a way for the spirit to be released into the earth and uh, allow nature.
disperse.
Yeah, it would disperse and allow nature to kind of process its being. But it was also very common that you would see these hogans and they would have a hole in the north wall, and that was its kind of marking as this is condemned. You cannot live here. No one lives here. It was just a typical marking of someone died here. Move on. Um, to it also, in addition to let me, in addition to a hole in the north wall, it was said to you need to destroy the possessions, and you absolutely cannot speak the name of the deceased. That name is to no longer be spoken of, as you can summon it back, you can enrage it, you can cause more issues. Um, and a lot of Native American cultures, specifically Navajo, spirits of the dead are not supposed to be malicious. They're very natural, they are residual, and that's where it comes to like spirit communication and speaking with your ancestors. It's a very natural thing, and it's something that they do. But it's said that spirits can become malignant if not handled properly. If you don't do all the proper death rites, that's where they become chindi. Because all this negativity is released into the earth. Everyone has negativity, and it's very common. But that's why they go through the practices of taking the dead outside, or if they're outside, leave them outside, let them pass away in nature. Go through your death rites, and then you can perform the funeral. But that's just a few things that I wanted to get into. That's why I brought up Hogan, because I guess Hogan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not, but that's their typical. It's like this dome shaped small building. It's like their version of a TP that you would see in pop culture, but
Interesting. So going back through, another belief with the Chindi is that the presence of medicine men and witches can spread the disease carried by the Chindi, and that they can infect people at will with it as well. Sorry. The symptoms of ghost sickness are usually fever, fatigue, and nausea. It can also be triggered by the presence of Chindi, or if a person is exposed to a piece of the body that's been buried. So some modern day influences. Belief in the Chindi is still prevalent in the Navajo community, with special rituals being conducted to ward off the effects of the Chindi. Cedar berries are used to make ghost beads, which are made from the hollowed out berries and are designed to protect against evil spirits. They are usually made by allowing ants to consume the inside of the berry, leaving behind a shell that's punched through, and they are then strung together on necklaces and other accessories. The other type of beads, which are also made from wood, are used to keep the Chindi at bay. The Chindi is an unrelenting spirit of vengeance, and while in its true form is invisible, it will frequently take possession of various animals in order to achieve its goal. A good way to tell if an animal is possessed by a Chindi is to see if it walks on two legs like a human, and this kind of goes back as well to our Skinwalker
I don't know why you
discussion.
said that, and I kind of pictured like a deer standing on two legs, and I just got like full body chills. That's a terrifying thought.
Like Rocky and Bullwinkle. Summoned by a shaman, the Chindi will go out and kill all that have offended the shaman or whoever hired him to summon the spirit, and it will not stop until it has been recalled by the shaman or until everyone is dead. Death comes silently, most often in the form of an unidentifiable, uncurable disease. In the early 1900s, two sons of the wealthy Long Salt family tried to scam a local medicine man who quickly learned of the deception and dispatched a Chindi to punish them. The Long Salt begged the shaman to call back the Chindi, but the old man died before the ceremony could take place. For several decades afterwards, the Chindi killed every member of the Long Salts, including a man who tried to protect the last surviving member, a young girl.
So yeah, basically to summarize, a Chindi is basically what's left over after death of all the unresolved, unrelenting feelings of hate, anger, sadness, gluttony, greed, like the seven deadly sins. What's left over of the human being, and if it's left indoors, it's enclosed. It exists. It can expel itself into the natural world if it's released outside, but it can still take possession of animals and other beings. And it's another way I would think that this could relate to Wendigo in a lot of senses. But anyway,
And same with Skinwalkers.
yeah, absolutely. But without going too deep into it, we're going to move on to Amhluk, which is a specific being that I think is very interesting. I'm going to let you take the lead on here, and I'll, if there's anything I can add, I'll add into it, but I think you got it.
Going back again, I apologize for mispronunciation.
Yeah, we're probably like butchering this, but we're podcasters. We're not historians or cultural scientists.
Yeah, we were also in the army, so I mean.
Facts, King. I'm gonna.
All right. For our last one, or for our last cryptid for tonight, Amhaluk.
Haluk. That's probably super racist to say it that way, but
The Kalapuya First Nations people have a legend about a water dragon who lives near their current home of the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde community of Oregon. So he is said to be living in a lake close to the Forked Mountain. The stories say that the dragon is horned, covered in spotted fur, and was associated with drowning, disease, and fog that comes off the water, like in the mornings and things like that.
so
Amaluk. Oh, good.
I just want to throw in. So from what I saw, um, from what he's saying, specifically like this kind of dragon, but I also saw it kind of looking in my mind similar to a griffin. It was like this spotted fur thing, but in some cultures it had fur legs as well as its body.
Also saw hairless legs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I saw more pictures and more about it had hairless, naked legs, like scaly kind of legs, and the rest of its body was fur. All of them say with long horns. But yeah, I have listed it would. It's been spotted in a lake near the Forked Mountains, 15 miles
Yep.
west of the Forest Grove of Northwest Oregon.
Yep. I have that as well. So a little quick fun fact. Amhaluk is featured in multiple Godzilla movies.
Yeah,
To
I have
include,
seen that so many times in the pictures it talks about. It doesn't
yeah,
show what it shows in the Godzilla movies. It just looks like this like
like
viney
vines and
looking
stuff. Yeah,
being. I do want to say you talked about how it's associated with drowning, disease, and fog. I want you to know this specific fog is considered the fog that floats over this specific lake, and it's called malarial fog.
yeah,
And is associated with pestilence and disease.
yeah. Interesting. So I do also find it interesting. So with those, and then I also have a piece here that said he liked to keep his possessions tied to his body. To me, that is very dragon-like.
Like
When
Smaug.
you look, oh, I like Smaug. But when you look at dragons in mythology, they are very tied to their possessions, to their
Yeah, they're
hoard.
always
But
protecting like a den of gold or
yeah,
valuable objects.
but also going with the malarial fog and disease and things like that. Dragons are often, a symbol of destruction and greed, and they bring pestilence and death, in their wake.
Absolutely.
So I thought when I was reading that, I was like, okay, like dragon-like, it sounds like a dragon to me, at least based on European mythology. But supposedly, Amhuluk is terrible to see. He's spotted with long horns on his head. His four legs are hairless, potentially, with various items tied around his
Shouldn't have
body.
skipped leg day.
He keeps, wherever he steps, the ground sinks and softens. Everything Amhuluk sees is captured and drowned in his lake.
Everything.
Even the trees around the lake have their crowns upside down around
So
the lake.
I
And the sky
specifically
itself,
wanted to ask you before we get into the sky part, what does it mean by its crowns? I'm not sure what a tree's crown
like
is. Like its
the tops of the
roots?
trees. That's a good question, actually. I had just interpreted it as
So
like the leaves of the trees, like would be the crown.
my
And again, I'm
thought,
basing that off of Lord of the Rings.
well,
So
my thought when I read that was, have you ever seen a man-made lake where there's trees still in the lake?
yeah,
You can still see like the twigs peeking out the top of the trees.
yeah,
Yeah, that's what I thought it meant by the crowns, meaning the top of the tree, just kind of peeking out of the water.
yeah.
I was wondering if you got that as well, because it wasn't clear. I just was wondering if that's what it meant. or if you had some insight.
So I had just assumed that the tops of those trees around that lake, maybe like, to me, I was thinking like kind of sunk down, so they were like looking more down toward the ground than they were up toward the sky. That's how I had interpreted it when I read it.
Ah, there's a
But I see
definition.
what you're saying as well.
The crown is made up of the leaves and branches at the top of the tree. The root crown of a tree is the area where below ground parts of the tree meet the above ground parts. So the crown of the tree is literally just the leaves. So you have like the roots,
Yeah.
the trunk, and the crown, I guess.
And the sky itself is drowned in the muddy waters. The banks of the lake are slimy and boggy, trapping all manner of animals. Grizzly bears instinctively enter the lake when they grow old and are changed into other beasts. The Atanakai, still going strong. An otter or seal like water creature
Yeah.
is the usual product of this metamorphosis.
Yeah. So I think I read the same thing you did. The specific quote I wanted to bring up was trees around the lake have their crowns upside down around the lake. The sky itself is drowned in the muddy water. I think
Mhm.
that is awesome. But yeah, it was grizzly bears at their time of dying would walk into the water. Specifically, they wanted to die in the water because they somehow instinctually knew that they would undergo metamorphosis, and it was
Yeah.
always like an otter like or seal type creature that they would
Hmm.
transform into. I just wanted to bring that up for emphasis that these animals would walk into this water knowing they were going to die because they wanted to undergo metamorphosis.
Yeah. And I think that goes to when you look at indigenous people's beliefs, like just how in tune nature is with everything. Um, and just like, you know, there just seems to be different rules when it comes to nature. I mean, like you think about it, we're a dominant species as human beings, but you go out in the woods, I mean, you're just another link in the food chain. And I think when you look at Native American, mythology, folklore, religion, however you want to, you know, talk about it, you know, um, it just shows how everything's connected in some way, shape, or form. And with this, like it ties in that like magic aspect as well. That I mean, nature itself is unpredictable,
Well,
and
that kind of leads into my own personal beliefs. Um, I want to summarize because I know we talked about it before, but
Mhm.
I think the Native American people are probably the rawest and truest, maybe not in every aspect, but in a lot of ways, the most factual accounts that we can get closest to when talking about the paranormal. And I
Mhm.
only say that because I started this as a skeptic. And now one of the things I hold most heartedly is spiritual energy. And I've looked at it in different cultures, but in Native American cultures, it seems to be like what I most likely align with. Um,
Right.
there's some kind of energy that connects all living beings on this planet. um that energy can be left behind in certain ways, but every living thing has this form of energy, and that's where the stone tape theory comes in, where this organic material can record certain events. It's because of this energy that's left behind. And I think that's kind of what it's talking about is animals are more in tune with that, and that's why they go to like this specific lake to die, uh, because they can sense this energy. And I think it's something we've lost along the way as people, as we've gotten more involved in our interpersonal lives and with technology. We've lost the rawness of what it means to be connected to this energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely can agree with that. As we continue, progressing in technology, we regress. When it comes to actually listening, um, listening to nature and listening to kind of our instinctual um, aspects of
Well,
ourselves.
yeah, it's hard to hold absoluteness in both facets. Like you
Mhm.
can you can be in tune with technology. You can be really smart. You can research the sciences. But
Yeah, I don't do that.
that leaves behind the emotional portion of it. And I think emotion is so much more than just how you feel. Because how many times have you felt shitty because of something you said to someone else and you saw their face? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you say something that hurts someone's feelings before you even see the look on their face. Sometimes you're just like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that, because you
Come on, Jared.
you
You
already
know I don't do
know.
that.
I mean, in certain ways that's logical, but in other ways I think it's an energetic response. It's like it's as fast as turning on the light switch. It's like light speed. You have that you have that immediate connection with that other person. And I think that's something that's lost a
Right.
lot. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something that feeds into this. I just wanted to bring it up because it's
Yeah.
very interesting that these grizzly bears intentionally, when they get of age, they intentionally walk into this lake to die in hopes of transforming into this other being, because they sense it. And
Hashtag no regrets.
it's not scientifically proven that they did this, but for some reason this is something that's repeated. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it
Yeah,
has
I mean,
some
and
historical
again,
significance.
well, and you see that in different mythos and stuff. You know, you see different creatures turning into different creatures, or
Yeah.
people being turned into animals and things like that. So, I
I
mean,
mean, there's
the possibilities
reincarnation,
out there.
there's all kinds of different things and different cultures that believe in this, but gen- generally speaking, one of the few things that I actually hold faith in is spiritual energy. And whatever culture that exists, spiritual energy is a thing. And that's one of the few things that I've found to be, in my mind, fact. I'm not going to say it
Yeah.
is fact, but in my mind, from all the investigations I've done and all the research I've done, I just find it so fascinating when I was reading about these grizzly bears that literally at their time of dying, they wander into a lake, potentially in their life by drowning or just floating away, in the anticipation of metamorphosis into these sea otters or
I think you just really
seal
like grizzly
like
bears.
beings or whatever. Yeah, it's just, it's so fascinating. They would do that because of their connection. I don't know if it's with the earth or with the spiritual energy that exists.
Yeah.
I have a whole conversation I want to have about spiritual energy. I want to actually bring my dad on to talk about, but oh, there's just so much I want to talk about. I just found it so fascinating. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So, three children once went out in search of Adash Adastashru. There at the fourth mountain, they met Amhaluk rising out of the ground and marveled at his beautiful spotted horns. Let's take the horns, they said, and make digging tools out of them. But Amhaluk impaled and lifted up two of the children on his horns, while the eldest boy escaped. The child returned home in terror. Something horrible has taken my brother and sister, he told his father. Then he slept, and his parents could see that his body was covered in blotches. The father went out, retracing his children's steps to the forked mountain. There the bodies of his children appeared out of the fog rising on the water. They were still impaled on Amhuluk's horns, and they cried, bear with me again, Didai, Didai, Didai. We have changed bodies. 5 times they rose and spoke, and 5 times their father wailed mournfully. For 5 days he waited, camping near the lake and mourning his children. And each of those days they appeared, repeating their sad words of to die, to die, to die. Then they sank under the surface and were never seen again. And Amaluk had claimed them for his own. And that's a little story I was able to find on Amaluk. All right, y'all. So that is our episode for tonight. We did have to cut out a couple cryptids, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Be revisiting them in January. And for anybody that is a Harry Potter fan, I specifically picked those 4 because they are the school names for the Ilvermorny magical wizarding school. So the American version. So, just a little fun fact, but they are in the Native American mythos and cryptids. So we'll be discussing those in January. And then in December, Jared will be hosting, and we will be talking about some more cryptids, but looking more at the cryptids and mythos surrounding Christmas. If
Absolutely.
you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll go into Christmas cryptids. I think we'll probably call it cryptids or Christmas cryptids. But yeah. So there was a lot more we had prepared for tonight, but it kind of ran over. So we'll revisit that in January. Tonight we're gonna wrap it up from there. If y'all have any specific interesting topics you want us to talk about, we are more than happy to research them and trying to find some historical fact and we can speak on it. Just let us know down in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, let us know by subscribing, click that like button, comment down below. Just let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. We can only improve by your intervention, by your comments. Jimmy, you look like you had something you want to say.
I was going to say also, if there's anything that you want me, or well, I guess it'll be me because I'll be hosting, but if there's anything that you want me to touch on more of the 4 cryptids that we discussed tonight, also drop that in the comments.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we'll address in January when we go back to Native American cryptids.
Again, so the way this is going to work is it's going to be me and Jimmy. We're going to be co-hosts. So this week it was his host. Next week it's going to be mine. Or
next month.
I say next week. Next month. In January it's going to be next week. But next month is going to be mine. We're going to go back and forth between who hosts. He's going to come up with the topic, and then he will kind of lead the conversation, but give me some homework on something I have to talk about. And then when it's my turn, it's going to be the same way. I'll come up with the topic, I'll lead the discussion, and then I'll give him some homework so he has something to talk about. If there's anything specific that we can discuss that you'll enjoy, let us know. Because it's going to be 2 dummies. I'll be intoxicated for most of them. He'll be intoxicated for some of them. We'll have other guests that will be a part of this. Like Zach, you've seen in the investigations. He'll be on one of the next podcasts. We have some other people that you would have seen in some videos, but again, there's a whole lot of drama involved. But we're moving forward with a heavy foot. We're going to start January really heavy. I really want to do at least 3 a month. My goal is 3 podcasts a month and an investigation. We'll see how it goes throughout the year, but as of right now, that's our plan. We'll record every Friday. We'll try and get one out every Friday. If not, we'll try and get it out before Sunday. If you didn't know, editing is hard, but we enjoy making these. It's a lot of fun. And I'm excited for the future.
Absolutely. And again, thank you all for taking the time to watch this. And yeah,
if you're still here by now, I don't know why you are. Jimmy's microphone sucks. But when you have 7 blue screens in one night, what can you do? The world is trying to push us away from this podcast, which means we have to be doing something right.
Absolutely. But again, thank you all for taking the time to watch this, and we look forward to having you guys with us in
Thank
December.
you so much. Leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy. We'll see you next time. My name's Jared, but you can call me Pilates, and this has been Jimmy.
Have a good one.
Take it easy.